Why is a man who needs no one feared more than one who commands armies? Why does true independence make people uneasy even when it isn't violent or threatening? It's easy to admire the idea of someone who stands alone, unshaken by praise, untouched by rejection, and unmoved by the opinions of the crowd. We imagine him walking through the world with calm certainty, free of need, immune to flattery or criticism. Yet something about him unsettles us. Not because we envy his solitude, but because it forces us to question the foundation of our own existence, our need to belong. The man who needs no one is not lonely. He is something else entirely, something rare and therefore dangerous. Dangerous not in the way a criminal is, or a tyrant, or a rebel. He is dangerous because he reveals how dependent we've become on validation, company, approval, and fear. His freedom is too loud, even when he is silent. We often mistake connection for necessity. We believe we need others to survive emotionally, socially, even spiritually. And in many ways, that's true. We are social creatures. We learn through others, grow with them, suffer and heal in their presence. But what happens when someone breaks that logic? What happens when someone does not need anyone? Not because they're broken or bitter, but because they have discovered a kind of inner fullness that makes external validation unnecessary. This person, by simply existing, becomes a threat to the way society is structured. Because modern life, despite all its praise for individualism, is rooted in dependence. Emotional, psychological, economic, and moral dependence. The workplace depends on employees needing jobs. Relationships often depend on shared insecurities. Entire belief systems depend on followers who fear questioning. And here comes someone who depends on none of it. He is not hostile, he simply doesn't need. And in that absence of need, he embodies a terrifying kind of power. To philosophers like Friedrich Nietzsche and Marcus Aurelius, this figure was more than just a loner. He was a mirror, a paradox, a warning. Nietzsche saw society as a herd, a system that demands conformity under the guise of morality. When someone dares to step outside of it, not out of rebellion but out of self-mastery, he becomes a wild card. Not because he wants to burn the world down, but because he's no longer playing the game. He doesn't crave your applause. He doesn't run from your disapproval. He may not even care if he's understood. His values are self-generated, and that makes him immune. Immune to manipulation. Immune to control. Immune, perhaps, to the very things that keep the rest of us in line. Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic emperor, took a different angle. For him, a man is meant to live in harmony with others. Humans are social by nature, and reason binds us together in a moral and civic duty to support one another. A person who declares they need no one is not just independent, they are out of tune with the natural order. Like a hand refusing to be part of the body, or a bee abandoning the hive. They may be strong alone, but their strength no longer serves the whole. And in a world that survives on cooperation, that kind of independence becomes a form of silent rebellion. But here's where the conflict deepens. Isn't it also true that the greatest atrocities have been committed not by the lone outsider, but by those embedded in the collective? Those who followed orders, obeyed authority, and blended into the crowd? If so, maybe the man who needs no one is not a threat to society, but a threat to its illusions. A challenge to its comfort. A reminder that perhaps our so-called connection is built less on love and more on fear. Think about how people react to someone who is truly indifferent to popularity. It's not admiration, it's suspicion. If he's not interested in winning approval, what does he want? If he walks away from a group without flinching, what secrets does he hold? If he doesn't respond to praise or insult, is he cold, or is he free? And what does that say about us? Maybe we fear the man who needs no one because he's already crossed a threshold we're afraid to approach. A place where comfort ends and responsibility begins. He's not relying on the world to tell him who he is. He's already decided. And whether we admit it or not, that kind of certainty unsettles us, because we lack it. We are conditioned from birth to seek. Seek attention. Seek approval. Seek love, belonging, status, even pity. The idea of not seeking is almost foreign. In fact, in many cultures, a person who claims not to need anyone is labeled with suspicion, antisocial, damaged, arrogant. But what if he's none of those things? What if his lack of need isn't a symptom, but an arrival? What if he's not broken, but whole? It's tempting to romanticize such a person as a sage or a saint. But he may not be either. He might be quiet, unimpressive, even invisible. You may not notice him at first. He doesn't advertise his freedom. But it's there, in the way he speaks without trying to impress. In the way he listens without preparing a response. In the way he walks away from noise, not to escape, but because he has better places to be, even if they are just within himself. He doesn't dominate others. He doesn't preach or convert. His presence doesn't demand attention, but it often changes the energy of a room. Because when someone no longer plays by the rules everyone else follows, the illusion of the game begins to crack. And the irony? Many who claim to be independent are still deeply attached to their image, their reputation, their role. True independence is rare. It's not about rejecting others, but about no longer needing them to complete the self. And in a world built on emotional transactions, a man who needs nothing has nothing to bargain with and nothing to lose. That makes him powerful and unsettling. So maybe the real question isn't why this man is dangerous. Maybe the question is, what does his existence reveal about the rest of us? What do we cling to that he has already let go of? What fears still govern us that he has already faced and defeated? His life poses a quiet question to each of us. If you had no one to impress, no one to please, no one to lean on or fear, who would you be? And perhaps that's the most dangerous question of all. There's a quiet revolution in being untouchable, not in the hardened, emotionless sense, but in the inner solidity that comes from having stripped away everything unnecessary. The man who needs no one has not shut the world out. He has simply ceased to depend on it for his sense of self. He no longer walks into rooms wondering if he will be liked, respected, accepted. He knows that such things, while pleasant, are as fleeting as the weather. They blow in, they blow out. His anchor lies somewhere deeper. We often mistake detachment for indifference. But to be free of need is not to be free of love. In fact, the man who has let go of need might be the only one capable of real love. Not the kind that grasps or clings, not the kind that trades affection for attention, but the kind that gives freely, because it isn't trying to fill a void. This kind of love doesn't entangle. It liberates. And liberation, to most people, is more frightening than control. Because control is familiar. It organizes our chaos. It offers predictable roles: parent and child, leader and follower, lover and beloved. But when someone comes along and needs none of it, when he is content to stand with you or walk away, without either gesture meaning more than it must, it unsettles every script we've written for our lives. Nietzsche saw this dynamic clearly. He believed that most people, though they speak of freedom, secretly crave chains. Chains of morality, chains of belonging, chains of certainty. Not because they love suffering, but because freedom demands something unbearable: responsibility. To be truly free means to stop blaming others, to stop leaning on institutions or ideologies, to face yourself entirely. The man who needs no one has already done this. He has crossed the fire and found what remains. And that is why people fear him. He is not easily swayed by promises. He doesn't melt under charm. He is unimpressed by credentials, titles, or applause. And so he cannot be bought. He cannot be owned. This makes him difficult to manipulate, not because he's resisting, but because there is nothing to manipulate. He's not trying to climb the ladder. He's not desperate to belong. He's not hunting approval like most of us are. He is simply present. And presence, real presence, is rare. Most people are only half there. The rest of them is entangled in memories, fears, future plans, roles to perform. But the man who has let go of need is often startling in his clarity. He listens without distraction. He acts without hesitation. He moves through life not with arrogance, but with simplicity. And this simplicity is profoundly disarming. To the Stoics, such composure would seem noble, even ideal, if only it still served the greater whole. Marcus Aurelius, though deeply committed to inner peace, believed that no man is an island. He warned against separating too far from others, not out of dependence, but because we are born for one another. Even the bees understand this. There is no honey without the hive. And yet, one must ask, what kind of hive are we serving today? Is it a hive built on honesty, on courage, on compassion? Or is it a hive of convenience, performance, and quiet despair? In a world where connection often means scrolling through curated illusions, where attention is bought and sold like currency, and where loneliness is masked by endless noise, what does it really mean to belong? Perhaps the man who steps outside of all this, who learns to sit in silence, who finds his meaning in solitude rather than distraction, is not rejecting humanity. Perhaps he is honoring it in its purest form. Maybe he's not withdrawing from people, but from illusions. From the masks we wear to survive. From the games we play to be seen. He is not cold, he is honest. And that honesty makes others uncomfortable, especially those who have built entire lives around being needed, admired, understood. There is a quiet violence in honesty. Not the kind that wounds, but the kind that reveals. The man who needs no one carries this kind of honesty. His presence whispers, "You are more than the roles you play." But it also asks, are you ready to live without them? And most are not. We are taught to fear aloneness. From the time we are children, being alone is punishment. A child who sits alone at lunch is a tragedy. A teenager who spends the weekend reading alone is labeled odd. An adult who enjoys their own company is questioned. Are they okay? Are they depressed? Do they hate people? But aloneness is not absence. It is not lack. It is space. And only in space can something authentic arise. The man who needs no one has not cut himself off. He has made space. And in that space, he has met himself. Not the self shaped by expectations or fear, but the raw, original self that existed before the world taught him to chase. To encounter someone who has done this is to feel both admiration and resistance. We want what he has, but we fear the price. Because to become him means shedding too much. Letting go of who we thought we were. It means stepping into a kind of spiritual nakedness that few are willing to face. But those who do, those who walk that narrow path, often become beacons, even if they never intend to lead. Their example becomes a question burning in the back of our minds. Could I live without all the things I think I need? Not just people, but praise. Not just connection, but recognition. Could I still be me? And if the answer is yes, even for a moment, then everything begins to shift. We begin to notice the places where we perform instead of live. We begin to question the voices that told us our worth was measured by how many people care about us, listen to us, like our photos, attend our parties. We begin to crave something deeper, an intimacy with ourselves that can't be given or taken away. And this craving can be dangerous. Not because it leads to destruction, but because it leads to transformation. The kind of transformation that threatens every system built on need, fear, and insecurity. So when people say the man who needs no one is a danger to society, perhaps they are right. But not because he seeks to destroy it. Rather, because he exposes what is broken in it. He challenges us to stop hiding behind our relationships, our titles, our tribes. He asks us to find ourselves beneath all that. And some will hate him for that. Because it's easier to call him cold than to face our own dependence. Easier to label him a loner than to examine our own emptiness. Easier to turn away than to consider that maybe, just maybe, he is not the one who is lost. Maybe he has simply remembered something we forgot. Something we were all born knowing before the noise, before the roles, before the need to please took over. That who we are, at our core, is enough. And that nothing, no applause, no relationship, no title, can replace the quiet power of knowing that. Of needing nothing. Of being free. And so we return to the question that lingers quietly beneath it all. What happens when a man truly needs no one? Not in the arrogant defiance of the wounded, nor in the isolated bitterness of the betrayed, but in the calm, unshakable ground of someone who has met himself and decided that he is enough. A man who walks not away from people, but beyond their grasp. A man who no longer confuses presence with dependence, or love with attachment. What do we do with him? How do we respond to a man who cannot be guilt, flattered, bribed, or broken? Some will admire him, many will fear him, but most will misunderstand him entirely. They will call him distant, when in truth he is the most present person in the room. They will call him arrogant, when he simply no longer performs humility to gain approval. They will call him dangerous because they cannot control him, and anything that cannot be controlled must, in the eyes of a society built on insecurity, be labeled a threat. He is not dangerous because he wants to hurt others. He is dangerous because he forces others to see themselves, their patterns, their illusions, their cages. And most would rather remain asleep than confront such raw clarity. But every now and then, someone will watch him walk through life and feel something stir. Something ancient. Something buried beneath years of noise and compliance. A distant voice that whispers, remember who you were before you needed to be liked. Remember who you were before you begged to belong. And that voice is the beginning of freedom. Not the freedom sold in slogans or posted in curated fragments online, but the freedom that exists in silence, in solitude, in the willingness to sit alone and still know you are whole. This is the freedom the untouchable man lives with daily, not because he has everything, but because he has let go of what never mattered. He has released the hunger for recognition. He no longer kneels before the altar of being understood. He has made peace with being misread, even hated, because he knows that truth is rarely embraced by the comfortable. This man, the one who no longer needs you, does not walk above you. He does not see himself as higher or better, but he has walked a road that few dare to take, the road through his own darkness, through his own dependency, through the terrifying landscapes of loss, rejection, silence. And he did not run. He stood there. He listened. He let it all echo through him until it no longer echoed at all. What remains is not a mask, not a performance, not an identity. What remains is essence. This essence cannot be faked. It cannot be manufactured in workshops or cultivated through trends. It is carved out slowly, painfully, beautifully, by surrendering everything false. It is the product of dying 1,000 tiny ego deaths and choosing to live anyway. Not because life is easy, but because life is real. You see it in the way he speaks, without urgency, without exaggeration. You hear it in his laughter, which comes not from cleverness, but from the absurdity of taking things too seriously. You see it in his eyes, which hold space for both joy and sorrow without needing to fix either. You feel it in his silence, which is never empty, but full of presence. And yet, this man, this free man, is not beyond suffering. He bleeds, he breaks, he loses. But he does not collapse into victimhood. He lets pain pass through him without becoming his identity. He cries without shame. He grieves without apology. But he never confuses feeling deeply with being destroyed, because he has already died to who he thought he was. He has already let go of being liked, wanted, celebrated. And from that death, something unshakable was born. Not perfection, not enlightenment, but honesty. And it is this honesty that society cannot bear. Because society, for the most part, runs on illusion. Illusions of power, success, belonging. Illusions that keep people striving, comparing, consuming. The man who sees through them all becomes a glitch in the system. A reminder that none of it is real. That most of what we chase is a distraction from facing ourselves. He is a mirror, one that does not flatter. One that reflects not what you want to see, but what you are afraid to confront. And that is why people turn away. Not because he is cruel, but because he is clear. And clarity is the most uncomfortable gift of all. But for those brave enough to keep looking, something shifts. Not all at once, but gradually. You begin to notice your own pretenses, your own cravings for validation. You begin to ask yourself, if I stop needing others to make me feel worthy, who would I become? This question is not for the faint of heart. It undoes you. It strips away the narratives you've clung to, the identities you've defended. It demands humility, honesty, courage. But it also opens the door to something rare, peace. Not the peace of everything going well, but the peace of knowing that no matter what happens, you are already enough. This is the peace of the man who needs no one. The peace that does not sway with opinions or circumstances. The peace that rests at the center of a storm and knows, without doubt, that nothing outside can define what's inside. And once you've tasted this peace, even briefly, you can never go back. You can play the roles if you must. You can engage with the world, love it even. But you are no longer ruled by it. You no longer worship at the altar of approval. You are no longer afraid of being alone, because alone is where you found yourself. And in finding yourself, you touched something sacred, something that no one can give or take away. A knowing, a presence, the truth. So yes, perhaps the man who needs no one is dangerous, but not to the world that is real, only to the world that is false. He threatens lies, not people, illusions, not hearts. And in doing so, he offers something precious, an invitation, not to follow him, not to become him, but to look within and ask, what do I truly need? And perhaps the answer is not more connection, but deeper solitude. Not more followers, but more silence. Not more admiration, but more honesty. Because maybe, just maybe, the one thing you've been running from, yourself, is the one place you were always meant to return to. And maybe that return, silent and sincere, is the most revolutionary act of all.